What's up, agency owners? Jason Swenk here with another episode of the Smart Agency Masterclass, a podcast dedicated to the agency owner that wants to scale and grow faster and also create freedom in their agency so they can pick and choose to do what they really love. And on today's show, I have an amazing guest where we're going to talk about buying and selling agencies. And they have a really cool business. And so let's go ahead and jump into it. Hey, Amanda, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you? Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, excited to have you on. So tell us who you are and what do you do?
Amazing. Yeah, thanks again for having me. Amanda Dixon, founder and CEO of Barney. We are an M&A advisory firm for agencies.
Awesome. And so what made you get into this? What's your background?
Oh gosh, I went through a couple of exits, serial entrepreneur, and the experience was atrocious. Everyone was ancient. No one understood how to value digital assets or assets that weren't tangible in their hands. And I found that I was selling a business that for me was life-changing, but for the market, no one cared. I couldn't get Goldman Sachs investment banking to return my phone call. So I ended up going with a business broker, and they just didn't have the level of sophistication to sell a business of the size that I wanted. And I realized there's this huge niche of businesses selling in the 2 to 50 million mark, people that need national buyers, not just local buyers, that are just severely underrepresented. So started the firm 7 years ago as a way to give back to founders going through the same kind of exit process that I went through.
You know, I had a very similar experience when I sold the first agency. You know, the business broker seemed to more care about making the deal happen rather than if it's the right deal. And
Exactly.
I didn't really figure that out until afterwards. I was just like,
Yep.
oh my God, deer in the headlight. My God, someone wants to
You have
buy
no idea
us.
what's going on.
You know, you're going to get all this money, but then there's so many gotchas in different things that people don't understand. And also too, like when you're just chatting with one company, it's kind of, you know, I remember, you know, like my deal, and this is probably like how you had it, is like you go under of a letter of intent. Now you have to stop conversations with everybody. And then it's just, they beat you up to the last minute. And then you tell your team, and then there's always these changes at the last hour. And if you pull out, sometimes, like I've seen companies go under because they pulled out, because they've took, you know, so it's a long process. Like, how long was your process that you went through?
So that was the other painful part. I realized, gosh, the process doesn't need to take 9 months or a year. That is excruciating. And deal fatigue is a real thing. I think that process takes so long for most folks because they don't have the buyers ready and waiting. If you're not industry focused and you're just selling one day a hot dog stand and the next day a digital agency, you have no ready and waiting buyers. So the first 2 to 3 months of that process is understanding the business, understanding the pieces of the business that make the most sense to buyers, and then finding the buyers. So I knew when I started this firm that I wanted to be super, super focused in digital-based businesses. And that makes the process just go a little bit faster.
Yeah. Well, I think it also benefits the buyer for the long fatigue anyway, because it's just like they drag it out so long. You put so many different things. You're just like, I might as well do it because I can't go through this again. And I've already taken my foot off the gas. So I'm kind of stuck. I feel when I chat with people, that's kind of what they're feeling. And I hate that. I hate that for them.
Totally. I think one of the things that happens when you have a buyer pool that's just ready and waiting for you know, the particular type of business that you're in this case, it's agencies, is you create some level of competition. I use that word lightly. But having conversations with multiple buyers and then ultimately being able to pick the buyer that, of course, makes sense financially, but ultimately it needs to make sense for your team and for the culture and for who your clients are. One of the things is, as you know, and your audience knows better than anybody, is the most important component of an agency is the human capital. And that's just very different than a construction company or a restaurant, when the food or the end product is ultimately the most important. If you don't have a great team who's loyal and taken care of in an agency, you're out of business. So being able to find the right buyer that's not just financial, but it's also culture is crucial. And you just don't know that by meeting with one person.
Before we get into kind of, making sure you got the right deal and that kind of stuff, what have you guys seen in the past couple of months for valuation of agencies? Yeah, everybody wants to know what's my agency worth. And I always tell them, well, it's worth what you sell for and what someone's willing to buy. But they kind of want a formula. I have a formula that it's kind of a general rule of thumb that we've done at Republics. But what's your formula?
Yeah, we love using multiple of EBITDA. I think your model is very similar to ours. I think you do a multiple of EBITDA and then 1x revenue, and then average it out. We like that model. Ultimately, what happens in agencies across the board, though, is if they've scaled too fast, they have too many team members, their margins might be really low. So it's hard to just do a multiple of EBITDA. If they haven't staffed up enough and are really at the brink of explosion internally, they may have 40, 50% margins, 60% margins. That's obviously not scalable. So we use a multiple of EBITDA knowing that there are always going to be adjustments. So we have a range that we use based on size. And then we look at 10 to 15, depending on the type of agency, factors that go into where you would fall as an agency within that valuation range. And that can be anything from client concentration risk to strength of leadership team, what the founder wants to do post-transaction, how you get new business. Is it inbound? Do you have an outbound sales program? So we look at those factors and then rank in our kind of proprietary ranking system to ultimately come up on determine where you are in that multiple range.
Do a lot of the agencies you chat with kind of go, well, I'm worth way more? And then,
Yes. The short answer is 100%. The challenge is a lot of agencies want to say they get SaaS multiples because they have developed some sort of internal operating system. And, we always tell folks, I hate to burst bubbles, but we are not in the business of taking on listings that we can't sell. So if you have an unrealistic expectation for what your agency is worth, we won't sell you, but I'm sure you can find someone who will, or who will try to. SaaS multiples are just higher. And if you don't have recurring revenue from outside clients paying for your software that you've developed, it's not a SaaS. That's just a project management system.
I'm glad that you said that, because I've been saying that for so long. I'm like, I don't care if you have your own little internal tool. Now, if you have your own CMS system, your email marketing system, and I like how you put the caveat, people are paying you exclusively for that, then yes, you can go into that particular market. But I'm like, why are you going to sell your agency? Keep your agency as an incubator agency and just build more products.
Exactly. Yep. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. How long should the sales process take, just to give people expectations? Like if they know they're getting wasting a lot of time.
Yeah, it's definitely increasing a little bit. In the height of COVID, because no one was meeting in person, we were getting transactions done in less than 90 days. Everything was just moving at the speed of light. Now that in-person meetings are back, and that's an important part for both buyer and seller to happen before, sometimes it's even before LOI, or that kind of exclusive period. And many times it's during the diligence period. You're adding a couple of weeks and sometimes months. I would plan on, worst case scenario, it taking 5 months. In some cases, it's taking, significantly less, but again, kind of planning on worst case scenario.
And what should people expect? Let's say this always happens, right? and this is probably when people come to you or after this fails, someone reaches out saying, hey, I want to buy your agency.
Yes.
And then they kind of waste a shitload of time and, all that kind of stuff. They really don't know what they're talking about. And they say, well, we'll pay you this. And then they kind of wheedle down. What should people look for when people reach out to them about
Yes.
buying?
Everyone in the agency space has been approached in the last 24 months about selling their agency, and if you haven't, you probably will be in the next couple of weeks. You absolutely need representation to go through the acquisition process. You will make up any fee that you are paying. It doesn't need to be us, but you need to have someone represent you in that process. There are so many idiosyncrasies that buyers will throw in. If they say, okay, your total deal value is, we're going to pay you $10 million for your business. They're not going to pay you $10 million for your business. They're going to pay you $5 million for your business. And then the other $5 million is going to be contingent upon what happens post-transaction. Those terms have to be negotiated in a way that protects you as the seller, no matter what happens. In addition to that, there's so many other little things that happen during the due diligence period. For example, how much money is left in the business post-transaction. That's called working capital. Some buyers, we had a seller come to us a couple weeks ago who we are now taking to market because buyers were approaching and they got a couple of offers. The offer that they got asked for 6 months of working capital left in the business. And this seller was going to sign it. 6 months of operating expenses left in a business is astronomical. Our fee was more than paid for with that one little, absolutely don't ever do this. So, one thing, I would say half of the businesses we sell come to us because they've been approached by a buyer. And we will absolutely guide folks in dealing with that buyer. But you never buy the first wedding dress you try on without trying on more dresses. So if you love the buyer, that's great, but you should still have conversations with other buyers just to see what it looks like. And maybe you end up going with that buyer and maybe you don't. But it's still important to test the market and see what a proper valuation and deal structure looks like based on what other buyers think as well.
So that's where I went wrong. I tried on the first wedding dress and I bought it. Maybe that's the thumbnail of me in a white wedding dress.
Exactly.
Or no, it should probably be a black wedding dress.
Yeah, most people do. I mean, why wouldn't you? It's people are approaching you. You're like, oh my God, I've worked so hard for this. This is a shit ton of money. And this is amazing. Ultimately, it never goes as smoothly as anyone would hope. And that's why people like us exist.
When should people start bringing in a lawyer or an accountant?
Yeah. Accountants need to be a part of the agency well before you decide to go through an M&A process. Having clean financials is absolutely crucial to ultimately getting across the finish line. If your books are a mess, we would tell you that you need to get them cleaned up before we could take you to market. Attorneys, depending on the size of your business, some people bring in attorneys at the LOI phase. Most people don't bring attorneys in until they get purchase documents. And when you're going through an agency acquisition, you need to make sure that your attorney that you're using has experience in representing sellers of digital agencies, because the terms are different, indemnification clauses are different. It's just the idiosyncrasies of the agency space and what's standard are going to be a little bit different. So, and given the nature of really having no boundaries, if you think about signing something like a non-compete agreement and you own a trucking company and you live in Southern California, your buyer is probably going to want you to sign a non-compete agreement for a 3-hour radius from Southern California. That doesn't work in the digital agency space. Your non-compete agreement is probably going to be for 5 years, and it's probably going to be for the whole country. So understanding how to still make that work for you is really important. And only attorney who has experience doing digital transactions is going to understand that.
Is that what you're seeing is 5-year non-compete? Is that the average?
Anyone who's being purchased by private equity, absolutely. 5 years is becoming standard because private equity wants to buy, hold, and then sell. And they know that to sell your agency for top dollar within their holding company or within their platform, they're going to need you to have a non-compete as the previous owner. So, typical investment holds are going to be 2 to 5 years, which gives them a little bit of runway. Yes, 5 years is standard to anyone that's selling to PE.
That's crazy. I think that's, man, mine was 2 years and I was like, oh, I was itching.
Yeah,
That's nuts.
there are some caveats and ways around that. Transparency is always the best policy when you're dealing with non-competes. If we have sellers all the time that say, listen, I'm selling my SEO agency, but I still want to be able to consult. I want to be able to write a book. I want to be able to do PPC. I want to be able to do branding. I want whatever it is. We obviously try and make those non-competes as specific as possible. So you essentially can't replicate your exact same business and steal all the clients and employees. But anything else, buyers will come to the table with something like, 5 years of not doing digital marketing. Well, that's ridiculous. No one would ever sign that because, what's digital marketing today isn't even going to be the same in 5 years. So it's about, it's all about the details, but in general, yes, 5 years.
And how long are you typically seeing earnouts? And what are your thoughts on earnouts?
Earnouts are a challenge because they misalign incentives post-transaction. We love deals where the founder still gets to feel like an entrepreneur and still gets to capitalize on the business continuing to grow post-transaction. Earnouts become challenging when founder makes decisions post-transaction in an effort to get their earnout. An example would be they say, gosh, I really need a COO. We need to scale. I need to make investments in infrastructure, but I'm not going to because I want to make sure I can still hit this EBITDA metric or this net income metric in year 2. That's where earnouts become a challenge. Unfortunately, many buyers still put earnouts in place. So the key to look for if you presented with an earnout is that the earnout is not based on rapid growth. It should really just be a protection mechanism for the buyer in the event of catastrophic implosion. So if you're hitting 3 million in revenue today, your earnout for year 1 should be 3 million in revenue, maybe modest growth, modest, 5-10% at the max, absolute max. And that's if you're getting a good amount of cash at close, over 50%. Year 2, same thing. Anything above 2 years, as someone on the sell side, I would say you should try and negotiate down. 2 years is really the max that we want to see. Big transactions or transactions with a high risk profile, something where you've got a massive client concentration issue, small team, not the right infrastructure in place. 3 years might be applicable there, but anything that's really standard, you should view it as really a protection mechanism for the buyer.
Yeah, and you got to realize too, as the seller, you're not in control anymore. So a lot of times that buyer can actually make it where you're outside that window and you don't get that earnout. So I tell a lot of people is like, be happy with the cash that you get and don't expect anything else.
You're 100% right. You never know what happens after the sale. So you have to be ultimately comfortable with the cash that you get at close. Now, in most cases, people get their earnouts. Not all, but in most cases, people hit the metrics and they get their earnout. We'll see what happens next year. That may change just depending on what happens in the market. At this point, most people are getting them, but you're 100% right. You lose control, and you've got to be comfortable with ultimately what you're getting at the closing table.
In wrapping up, what are your thoughts on agencies doing roll-ups. And when I'm saying a roll-up is not an agency buying other agencies and, getting bigger, is just a roll-up, like to merge really quick and then try to package it together to sell. Because there's a lot of people
Yeah,
trying to do this, and I'm like, come on.
yeah, we've been on we've been on all sides of that transaction. Unfortunately, it's a really great idea in concept. Unfortunately, it doesn't work most of the time. Most of the time, integration is so much harder than people think, and buyers want to see integrated businesses. They want to see a well-oiled machine, systemized processes, people that have worked together for a couple of years. Again, in theory, it's great. We've seen it done a couple of times, but we've sold businesses to folks and then, said 2 months later, okay, now we want to sell this as a package and taken it to market, and buyers are like, that's great, but we're not giving you multiple arbitrage on on a business that they paid 5x for 3 months ago. Now you're asking 8x for the same EBITDA.
Yeah, I just hear a lot of people are like, oh yeah, we grew this really big and we just merged all these companies together. I'm like, well, what's the track record? Like literally,
right.
It's like, how long did you integrate everything? Is it seamless? It's just because you bolted up doesn't mean you're worth that.
Exactly. And ultimately what we have found buyers really want to see is that you've proven that you can cross-sell all of those services to a unified client base. And until you've done that and you have historical churn numbers on your clients, it just doesn't provide a buyer a ton of value yet.
Yeah, awesome. Well, this has been amazing. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you think would benefit the listeners?
Yes, you asked actually, and I think I skipped over the answer. I just wanted to touch on the market really quickly. There's obviously lots of concerns about what's happening in the market. I just, for what it's worth, wanted to share, we are still seeing strong interest from buyers, as I'm sure that's kind of uniform across the market. It's not just us. Anyone kind of doing M&A, I think in the agency space is still seeing just significant interest from buyers. There's still so many more buyers than there are sellers. But I don't think that the market is going to go anywhere. So there's no reason that someone's back needs to be up against a wall to sell. I think you still have a huge runway in front of you. So don't feel pressure to sell. If you do want to sell, don't be concerned that there are no buyers because of the market. So I think no matter where you are in the process, you're in a really great position still in this industry.
Oh yeah. I mean, this industry is only growing. And, I always,
Yep.
I haven't watched the news in forever, but I hear people saying, oh, the recession is here. I'm like, well, that's the opportunity. I actually think there'll be even more buyers and even more opportunity for you guys all to leverage. So yeah. What's the website people can go and check you guys out?
Wearebarney.com. I'm also super active on LinkedIn, so anyone can find me there too.
Awesome. Oh, LinkedIn. Oh, I get so much spam at LinkedIn. I've been so turned off by LinkedIn lately. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, it is getting a little out of control, but I'm still there if anyone needs me.
Awesome. Well, go check them out. And if you guys want a group of individuals that are all agency owners that get together on an ongoing basis to help you make the right decision and avoid the wrong decision, I'd love for all of you to go to digitalagencyelite.com. Go check that out. It's digitalagencyelite.com. And until next time, have a swank day.